In this lesson, we're going to be completing the square in vertex form. In a previous lesson on completing the square, we were taking a quadratic equation and we were trying to figure out where the parabola, the graph, would cross the x-axis. We had to use completing the square because it was not easily factorable, so we had to use a different form and solve that to figure out where the graph was crossing the x-axis as our solution. So when we were completing the square, after we found our solution, the graph, let's say it looked like this, we were looking at that point and that point. That was where the graph crossed the x-axis, and that was the solution to make it equal to 0. So that was the points we were looking at before. So today, we're going to be doing something different, and we're going to be looking at this point right down there, which is called the vertex. So we're going to still use completing the square, but instead of finding where it crosses the x-axis, we're going to be looking at this point at the very bottom, or if it's this way, downwards, this point up here. So either way, we're trying to figure out where that point is, called the vertex, what that coordinate is. So the equation we're going to end up with is y equals a times x minus h squared plus k. Now also, y could also be f of x, does not matter. Both of those mean the exact same thing, so sometimes you'll see f of x, sometimes you'll see y. It doesn't matter. When you have an equation, they're interchangeable. But we're going to get it into this form here, right there, a times x minus h squared plus k. That's the vertex form. And we're going to complete the square first to get it into that form. Alright, so the first part of this, the a, that number there is going to tell you if the graph is up, pointing up, or if it's going down. So if it's positive, if it's a positive number, if your a is a positive number, then your graph is going to be upward. And if your a is a negative, then it's going to be going downwards, just like this here. And also, as a gets further from 0, it doesn't matter if it's positive or negative, the graph gets narrower. As a gets closer to 0, the graph gets wider. So if I had, let's say, 5, then it's going to get narrower. Or even if I had negative 5, those would be about the same. But if I had, let's say, 1/2, that's going to be wider because it's getting closer to 0, and the wider a graph gets closer to 0, and a horizontal line is a 0 slope. Okay, so let's try our first one. So we have f of x equals x squared plus 2x plus 5. Once again, this could have been y, does not matter. Sometimes they're going to have y, sometimes they have f of x. It means the same thing. First thing you're going to do is set the whole thing equal to 0. X squared plus 2x plus 5 equals 0. And just like in completing the square in the previous lessons, we're going to get a new c, because remember, this is our c value. So we need to get a new c to factor this. So we're going to have x squared plus 2x, and we're going to subtract 5 from both sides. And now we're going to be able to find our new c there. So we take our b term, which is there. We take half of that, and we square it. So that's going to be 1 squared, so that's going to be 1. So we're going to plus 1 there. Alright, so now our equation is going to be x plus 1 squared, and whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other. So we also have to add 1 over here. So we have x plus 1 squared equals negative 4. We have to put the negative 4 back onto the other side. So we're going to have now x plus 1 squared plus 4 equals 0. So I just added 4 to both sides. And now we have it in that the vertex form equation there. So our a, which is right here, doesn't look like there's a number, but there's a 1 there. So our vertex then is this number here and this number here. So whatever this number here is, this one, you're going to write the opposite. So since it's plus 1, you're going to write negative 1. And this number here, which is 4, that just stays whatever it is. So if it's minus 4, you put negative 4. If it's positive 4, you just put 4. So that's my vertex. So that means if I would graph that, my vertex would be over to negative 1, up to 4. And so it'd be something like that. So we're looking at this spot right there. Since this is also a positive, this number right here is positive, it's going to be going upwards. So our graph will look upwards there. And also then our axis of symmetry is just a line right through where that point is, which is negative 1. So our axis of symmetry is x equals negative 1. Alright, let's try another one here. So we have y equals x squared minus 6x plus 11. So we're going to set that equal to 0. Minus 6x plus 11 equals 0. X squared minus 6x. Got to find a new c, so we're going to leave that blank. Equals, subtract 11 from both sides. So now we take half of our b term and square it. So that'd be negative 3 squared, which is 9. So it's going to be plus 9. Whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So now it's going to be x, and it's going to be minus, because we have a minus there. 3 squared equals negative 2. We need to get that negative 2 back onto the other side, so it's the equation, so it's equal to 0. So we're going to have x minus 3 squared, add 2 to both sides, and then we have our equation. So our point will be then, once again, you look at this, whatever it is, you take the opposite. Since it's minus 3, it's going to be 3, and this is just whatever it is. If it's plus 2, then you're going to take 2 there. So that is going to be our vertex. Our axis of symmetry is x equals 3, and since there's a 1 in front of there and it's positive, it's going to go up like this. Alright, our next is going to be f of x is 2x squared plus 8x plus 9. Set it equal to 0. Now if you remember the previous completed square, this number right here, your a value, always has to be a 1 in order to complete the square. If it's not, then we have to factor out a 2 from everything. So we're just going to divide everything by 2. That'll factor that out. So if you divide that by 2, divide that by 2, divide by 2, I have x squared plus 4x plus 9 halves. Put the 9 halves on the other side, so I have x squared plus 4x. Leave a blank there because you want to find your new c, equals negative 9 halves. Take half of your b value, so 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 squared then is 4, so plus 4 plus 4. So this is going to be x plus 2 squared equals, find a common denominator, and the common denominator would be 2, so I'd have 9 halves plus 8 halves, which is negative 1 half there. Since we factor out a 2, we got to bring that 2 back, so we're going to multiply this by 2, and whatever you do to one side, you have to do the other. Multiply that 2, so I have 2 times x plus 2 squared, and negative 1 half times 2 is negative 1. You have to bring that negative 1 back over to the other side, so everything's on one side. So I have 2 times x plus 2 squared plus 1 equals 0. So our vertex is this number here right there. So we always write the opposite, so that'd be a negative 2. And it's also this number, and it's always the number no matter what it is, 1 there. So that's our vertex. We have a positive 2, so it's going to upward. And our axis of symmetry is at negative 2. So that if I graph that, then it's going to be something like this, and it will be right at negative 2 there. Alright, our next one is y equals negative 2x squared minus 16x minus 32. Set that all equal to 0. And now we're going to divide everything by negative 2 because we have to have this a value as a 1, so we have to divide everything by negative 2, and negative 2. So I'd have x squared plus 8x plus 16 equals 0. Then we have x squared plus 8x. Leave this blank, so you need a new c. Put the 16 on the other side, so minus 16 from both sides. Alright, so then we take half of your b value. So we take half of that. 8 divided by 2 is 4. Square that, so it'd be plus 16. Whatever you do to one side, you have to do the other. So I'd have then x plus 4 squared. And have it equal to 0, because negative 16 plus 16 is 0. And since we factored out our negative 2 before, we have to put that negative 2 back. And also we need to put our what's over on the right-hand side back over to the left-hand side to get everything on one side. But since it's a 0, it doesn't matter. So my answer will be negative 2 times x plus 4 squared equals 0. So my vertex is, take that number and put its opposite, so it'd be negative 4. And since there's nothing in this spot here, it's going to be a 0 though. So that's our vertex. And also we're going to look at this number here. Since it's negative, it's going to be upside down, my graph will be. And the axis of symmetry would be at x equals negative 4. So that means it's going to look like this. It's going to be upside down. And I'm not saying that's exactly how it is, but this would be negative 4. And that's our axis of symmetry. Alright, our last one here then. So, we have our f of x equals negative 3x squared plus 6x minus 5. Set that equal to 0. Since this is not 1, we have to make that into a 1. That's how you do completing the square, if you remember, that's what I said. So, we're going to divide everything by negative 3, divide by negative 3, divide by negative 3. So, I'd have x squared minus 2x plus 5/3 equals 0. X squared minus 2x, put the negative 5/3 on the other side. Leave a space right here for your new c. So we have negative 5/3. Take half of your middle term, negative 2. Take half of that, and then square it, so that'd be negative 1 squared, which is 1, so it's plus 1. Whatever you do to one side, you have to do the other. So then this is going to be x minus 1 squared. If you remember, because this always tells you what's going to be right there. If it's positive, it'd be plus. If it's not, then it'd be negative. Then it's going to be equal to, make this into common denominator of 3, so it'd be, plus 3 over 3, so it'd be negative 2/3. And now we also have to bring down our negative 3, because that's what we factored out, so we have to put a negative 3 there. So we have negative 3 x minus 1 squared, and we have to multiply this by negative 3 also, because we brought that down and we're multiplying that side. So I'd have equals 2. That 2 has to be brought over, so everything's all on one side. So we have negative 3 x minus 1 squared minus 2 equals 0. So then we would have our answer, our vertex, would be, you always take the opposite of what that is. Since it's a negative 1, it'd be a positive 1, and this just stays whatever it is, negative 2. It's going to go downwards, because we have this negative 3 right there. So it's going to go downwards, and our axis of symmetry is x equals 1. And that's a lesson on completed square in the vertex form, so I hope this is helpful for you. It's kind of fast, but I think there's some good examples in there. And sorry, there was no cat today. She was sleeping, so you didn't have to worry about her meowing or me throwing her at all. So anyway, let you go. Talk to you later. Bye. Bam.